Good evening. My name's David Wilkinson. I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Corporate Engagement and Advancement at Macquarie University. And part of advancement is alumni, so that's why I'm here this evening. And I'm delighted to be here to be the MC for this evening's part of our Global Alumni Impact Series. And obviously we're here to talk about disruptive innovation. So it's my pleasure to just welcome now the speakers that we have here this evening to discuss this very interesting concept of disruptive innovation. First of all, Professor John Hedberg. John is the Executive Director at Macquarie's ICT Innovation Centre in the School of Education. He's a leading academic in the design, implementation and evaluation of technology-based learning in childhood through to adult education. He's taught postgraduate courses on cognitive strategies, interface design for learning, and implementation and evaluation of technology-based learning. John's designed training, needs assessment, evaluation systems, and conducted many workshops on instructional design and evaluation of e-learning environments. And as you would expect, is regularly a keynote speaker at conferences on educational technologies all around the world. Annette Redmer is a leader in user experience, creative direction and business development through her company Red Mirror. Red Mirror helps other companies to evolve and innovate their products and services through redesigning and redefining user experiences, creative and digital strategies within current and future trends. Annette has a Bachelor of Arts and Multimedia Engineering from Gerrit Rietveld Academy in the Netherlands, and also a Bachelor of Architecture from Hawk University in Germany. Andrew Mellett is the Managing Director of Plexus. Plexus started in 2012 with the mission to transform the value of the legal industry by building a better model for the client and for the lawyers without the burden and the baggage of what traditional law firms may face. It's almost even is it Uber for lawyers almost? Something like that. Maybe we'll hear about it. Andrew has a Bachelor of Business in Accounting and Finance. And our facilitator this evening is Nigel Freitas. Nigel is a former Sky News business and technology reporter, including hosting the weekly Technology Behind Business program. He's currently Senior Media and ICT Policy Advisor for the New South Wales Government and is also very wisely undertaking his MBA at the MGSM. He has degrees in business information technology, journalism, theology, and along with his MBA, of course, Nigel may even embody disruptive innovation himself. So please welcome our panel for tonight, and I'm very pleased to be able to hand over to Nigel, who's going to facilitate things. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wilkinson, for that introduction, and welcome to everyone here tonight. It's great to see such a big turnout, and clearly disruptive innovation is quite a big deal for us all. As Professor Wilkinson said, I used to be a journalist, but after undertaking my MBA and seeing the writing on the wall for the media industry, I decided to call myself a communications professional, and I've now broadened my skills space quite considerably. So I'm also a refugee of disruptive innovation in a way. But can I ask you a question first? How many people here have used Uber tonight? How many people here have used Uber? If you put up your hand if you've used Uber. Okay, quite a few. What about Airbnb to rent out your houses when you're on holidays? Last night.
Last night.
Excellent.
Melbourne.
What about Bitcoin? Oh, okay, only a couple of people. So that's still got some ways to go. But it's quite clear that these kind of technologies are disrupting our everyday lives in quite a remarkable way. But I did see a quote today that said, when everything is disruptive, then nothing is disruptive. So what is disruptive innovation? Let's ask our academic, Professor John Hedberg, for a definition. Professor Clayton Christensen from Harvard, he came up with this term, and he talked about a process where a product or service, it starts at the lower end of the market, and then it moves up and it takes out the incumbents. Is that definition still hold?
I think so. I think rather than define it in scholarly terms, I think I'll give 3 examples. We've all in the past used 35mm cameras. Looking around, yes, you've all used them. Then came along Polaroid cameras, which started off as a low-quality technology and did eventually grow, but it had certain disadvantages, like you couldn't get blow-up prints and things like that. And then along came digital technology, and we have now in our pockets smartphones with very high-resolution cameras. And with this change, you see people like, or firms like Kodak no longer manufacturing film. You see each of us being able to make photographs of the events in front of us and immediately share those with others. And you can also manipulate them and play around them with other ways. And this change in different technologies, just with digital imaging, has largely changed the lives in which we've grown up over the last 20 years.
We couldn't take selfies with 35mm cameras, so it's been a very positive development.
It's interesting, even with the digital cameras, they still get those long extension leads and have a camera over there. But anyway.
Andrew, tell us about Plexus, because I've seen this described as taking the law out of the old law firm, and this is a company that you've set up. Why did you set it up, and do you see this as disruptive?
Sure. Look, first of all, I think, although I really respect Clayton Christensen, I think his definition is perhaps too focused on technology. And originally it was focused on disk drives and Intel. The example you gave of Uber is a classic example where actually disruption came from the top. So they came with black cars, so essentially a limo service at a reasonable cost, and now have moved down. So I got dropped off last night in a Toyota. But disruptive innovation to me is just any change in a market that delivers a human need more efficiently than previously. The reason I started Plexus was because I was interested in disruptive innovation, I suppose, and I worked for a company before which was somewhat disruptive in its space. And so when I was casting around for what business I'd start, I really liked this idea of unlocking value for all stakeholders as opposed to just replicating someone else's model and working out how to make money out of it. In my field, which was finance and accounting, I couldn't work out a model to do that, but I had a friend who was moaning and groaning about the problems in the legal industry, and I figured where there's a problem, there's an opportunity. And when we started unpicking the economics of the traditional law firm model, we recognised that you have these partners who are perhaps earning $1 million, $2 million a year on the more extreme ends. Then you've got lawyers who are pretty disenfranchised with the traditional employee value proposition, massively high overheads, and clients who in most cases are dissatisfied. And so we started saying, well, look, why do you need this partnership structure and why do you need these massive overheads when if you look at how an IT consultancy, for example, works, it operates like a business very efficiently. And so we started with this simple idea. The word plexus is the meeting point of nerves in your body. So if we could get a network of talented lawyers together, we could strip out the overheads in the partnership structure and deliver legal work far more efficiently. And that model succeeded, and we grew very rapidly. And then we said, okay, now let's look at how we actually do the underlying legal task more efficiently than it's ever been done before. So we started applying methodologies which have been applied in manufacturing, IT, etc., like Lean Six Sigma, and re-engineering the way the work was done. And then about 2 years ago, we said, well, now we've process mapped out how a legal task is done. If we can define the rules for any task, then we should be able to apply technology to it. And so in June this year, we launched the first application of a form of artificial intelligence in the Australian legal industry, which takes a task which costs a couple of $1,000s and takes a few weeks for a traditional law firm to turn around. And we can now put this tool in the hands of a non-lawyer. They can turn the work around in about 10 minutes, and it costs a few $100s.
Will that put lawyers out of work, that tool?
Yeah, so we get asked that a lot. I mean, I think the interesting thing is that whenever anyone sees change, they always say, "Oh, this is going to put people out of work." And a question you asked earlier is like, is disruptive innovation a fad? Well, perhaps the name is, and consulting companies are great at coming up with new buzzwords to sell more consulting engagements. But this has been happening for thousands of years, and you think about the Industrial Revolution was obviously a disruptive innovation in itself, and of course the Luddites stuck their clogs into the machines in Holland because they said we're going to all lose our jobs. But today there's not too many people who are nostalgic about making clothing by hand.
Or lawyers, for that example.
And we think the same with the legal industry. The work that we're applying this technology to is the work that lawyers hate doing and clients hate paying for, and so it should actually elevate lawyers to focus on more interesting work.
Okay, so Annette, that's an industry view. Now you kind of work at the coalface of users and user experience. How are you seeing disruptive innovation or innovation itself transform that industry?
Thank you for that question. You might have heard Steve Jobs. He said, the customer doesn't know what he wants, so we have to create it. And I agree with that. I really do. But what literally user experience is about, or where it starts with, is that we need to learn what the customer thinks, right? We need to learn what he thinks or she, and what drives these people. And out of that, we can create something. And we can create the future out of that, and we can disrupt. So that's literally where I come from, in a nutshell.
Okay. Professor Hedberg, we've got a lot of people here tonight. And disruptive innovation, I read an article before I came here, and it said pretty much any conference you go to, there's a speaker or a topic on disruption. And the minute you tack that word on, you're going to get a full house. So clearly MGSM also read that article before they did this event tonight. But to that point, what is it about this wave of innovation that's different? Because we've had electricity, we've had the automobile, we've had the Industrial Revolution. What's happening now that's different, or is this just a management buzzword?
I don't think it's just a management buzzword, although it's rather nice to have something defined, I guess. But in reality, it's the combination of a series of elements, I believe. It's not just the technology, I think you're right there. It's also about the people, it's about the configuration in which that technology is set up, and it's also about the tasks that they want to do. If I take a context in which I'm very familiar, that is the school system, it's really interesting to see what different school systems have done to set up their IT infrastructure. The ones that did it from a technology perspective often did it so that it was easy to manage by the technologists. Those that actually talked to the teachers that actually have to use this technology started to realise there are ways in which you can configure things that maybe not quite as easy to manage, but are much more useful, and you get the teachers and their students actually using the tools. But if you also look at the types of tools, in the last few years, you've probably all worked in organisations that are going through changes in the sort of tools that they're using. If you go into a classroom which is pushing the edge today, you'll find a lot of teachers working with small groups of their students, usually on tablets or similar devices, smart devices, and they can take these devices out of their classroom. They don't have to go to a special room called a lab to use this device, and they can use them more frequently. The other thing too is often the devices are provided by the parents, and the students are bringing their own devices to connect to the network. So it's that combination of elements that coming together can change the way things are done.
If students are working on tablets, and they used to be laptops, but now there's tablets and phones, do we still need to teach handwriting in high schools or secondary schools?
My approach is when you run out of batteries, it's a very good backup.
Good answer.
I think you do.
Yeah, because some schools in the US have stopped teaching handwriting for this reason.
I think you've still got to do it because it's part of the other sort of cultural issues, cultural fabric, the way in which you communicate. And the other thing too is if you didn't teach handwriting, you would do all the graphologists out of business, because just looking at the way people write, they can say things about your personality. Right. But realistically, I think it is quite interesting to see people use things creatively.
And you had a view on that as well.
No, I just really think you ideate differently when you write, when you sketch, when you know how to use a pen than on the computer. Obviously, we have tablets where you can literally handwrite. I do that on my phone, but you need that tactile part. Okay. It really is a different connection to your brain. It uses different areas in your brain, and you want to be able to innovate and create with as much diversity as you can. So I would like to have that, keep that handwriting piece.
And we have to do our exams at MGSM as well via handwriting. Annette, you also worked before this in a company called Living Tomorrow, and this is all about a topic or a trend called the Internet of Things, which is everyday household objects being connected to the internet, as I understand, and being able to collect and sense information about that. What kind of impact do you think that will have on how we live? Because many futurists say that, in fact, is going to be the next big thing when our clothes or our shoes or our fruit bowls are all connected to the internet.
Actually, it's already there. It's not evenly distributed yet. Yeah? I work together with a client in Adelaide, and we are working on the Internet of Things with a couple of disruptive technologies to make people's life easier. I really would like to use the term evolutionary technologies, because that is something I stand behind, something that makes our lives better and also the environment better, and that's what that is. For example, the Internet of Things itself is literally making devices intelligent. So it's not only applied to the household, it's actually applied to any electric device. Your car is more or less intelligent, and things connect together. They actually can group them. You can group your, let's talk about the home, you can group your lights with your washing machine, your TV, your entertainment system, maybe your bathtub, and you can get a cocktail hour setting when you come home at 5 that, you know, the bathtub is filled up, 40 degrees water, bubbles, right music, right lights, right temperature. So these were things that we were literally prototyping at Living Tomorrow together with big worldwide corporates, but also very small local companies in the Netherlands, in Belgium, and in Silicon Valley. And yeah, it was a fantastic experience, definitely. So I did a lot of innovation management and thinking there. Yeah.
And you talk us through the Uber experience for people that haven't used it, because the other night on the news there was a story about a limousine driver, I think his name is Russell Howard, who's going around conducting citizens' arrests of drivers that are in fact using the Uber service, because he says it's illegal. You can't offer a private car and you're essentially offering a deregulated limousine service. So he's responded that way. The Taxi Council seems quite supportive in a way as well. Do you think that, based on what you know about Uber and the experience they offer, can the taxi industry come back and compete with Uber, or does this now herald a very new and disruptive era, which would potentially mean the end of the taxi industry sometime down the track?
Yeah, well, I certainly wouldn't be buying taxi plates right now. I don't think that would be a sound investment. But look, I mean, I think basically what they're doing is creating a marketplace that's far more efficient than the traditional taxi industry. The one element they've got to get across is some sort of certification for drivers, quality control process. Now, there could be some arguments that the taxi industry hasn't done a great job in that historically either, but certainly, regulators have got to keep pace with the innovation.
Who enjoys their taxi experience? Yeah, one person. Okay, we've got a taxi driver in the audience here tonight.
Yeah. One of the things I like about the Uber experience is that not only when you get out of the car does Uber ask you to rate the driver then rates you. So when I first experienced Uber was in San Francisco about 3 years ago, and we're standing on a street corner with a friend of mine who lives in San Francisco, and it was raining, and we'd called for an Uber, and it wasn't there. We could see it on the map. It was about 5 minutes away, and a cab came past, and I was like, let's jump in the cab, as you perhaps might if you were dishonest, which I'm not, in the taxi, if it was a traditional taxi. And he said, no, we can't do that. That'll ruin my Uber rating. And he was deadly serious, because basically then the taxi drivers say this is an unreliable passenger, I'm not going to pick him up, and that transparency of information is making the whole marketplace for transport far more efficient.
What else do you get rated on out of interest in Uber? Is it your conversation skills with the driver? Or
well, you do notice that the Uber drivers are a lot more gregarious.
I'll actually come back to that, because that's an interesting point that an Uber driver made himself, where he talked about the pressure the rating system puts on him. He says, I've been driving for 30 years, I've never had a single complaint, but now with this Uber system, if my rating goes from 4.8 to 4.6 out of 5, I could be docked money. So there's a real human cost in that. Have we really thought through the implications of assigning ratings to people and really these online reputations?
Well, I'm not sure about all the ramifications, but I mean, I think transparency in almost any market is. If you look at what they teach in the MBA, is that information is one of the keys to a perfect market, and having the sort of information about selecting your driver or the driver selecting the passenger can only be a good thing.
Okay, Professor Hedberg, you talked about education in a classroom perspective, but today in the Financial Times there was an article that some people here might have seen about business schools a survey of management academics, about 400 of them from Europe, and 80% of them said that they predict a large number of business schools will close in the future or will have to merge to survive. So it looks like this sector is also ripe for disruption, and we have things like the massively open online courses, lynda.com, some universities giving out their materials for free. What do you see happening in the education space, and will that mean that our fees will increase or decrease going forward?
It's very difficult to predict the future. And I guess I'd be very careful, because over the last 5 or 10 years, most higher educational institutions have moved to much more of a blended type of learning, where technology and technological delivery is a fairly major component of the way they interact with their students. The only thing about it is that because it costs a lot to manage the interaction, what the universities have done is tended to go for MOOCs and these massive online open courses, where basically you can get access to the content and you can go through these experiences as they're produced online, but you don't walk away with a piece of paper. You pay extra for the piece of paper. So what the institutions have done is essentially position themselves as credentialing, and you can almost do the course anywhere. And if you think about it, most of the stuff that you do in management schools is repetitive. The stuff that you do you'd never do it at Macquarie, but the stuff you do at Sydney and New South Wales would be very similar, and they'd certainly use a lot of the same resources. So the real strength, I think, of education going into the future is the ability to package it and to provide interaction and feedback and support for students, however that's managed, is going to be the critical thing, and that's the thing you're going to pay for, and that's the thing you'll probably base your judgment on. And if a school doesn't do that, they probably won't exist.
Could you say, though, if you think about what we're saying there is essentially the information value is being commodified, and look, I love Coursera, because if I want to see what Yale's teaching in business school right now, I can go online for free. Then what the university is essentially providing is validation of the level. Why couldn't that be disrupted? Why couldn't I go online and do a Coursera exam or maybe a Macquarie exam to validate whether or not I'm at a certain level to be hired?
Well, they can.
Yeah.
In a lot of places, all you have to do is sign up for the credentialing part,
Sure.
and you can do the study elsewhere. I mean, the MIT open materials that they made available to everyone are just really sort of overheads and course notes and things like that.
Yeah.
Eventually, people at Brigham Young decided to actually add the tutorial component to the MIT materials, and people sign up for that because the materials are free, and it's the tutorial and credentialing that they value. So however it's offered, I think that'll be the defining difference.
I would like to add one thing,
Sure.
because I think it's really important, or I would like to hear your take on it. I think definitely the network, you connect with people in a very different way. So the network the camaraderie you build up, sometimes, at least in my case, it lasts for life. However, I think one value, or where I always excelled in the courses, was when I had an outside mentor, an industry mentor in there. So I really like also that Macquarie is working with WIL, Work Integrated Learning, where actually somebody from outside comes and there's like a real challenge for the students, and they have actually to do something real. I was lucky enough to kind of participate in that, or to facilitate that last year, and I thought it was amazing. What's your take on that? How do you see that?
I think work integrated learning is really important. And if you look at most of the professional courses today, there is some component of that, whether it happens within their courses at university, but usually it happens on site somewhere else in real world context. And as long as it's managed and the quality of that experience is enhanced and cared for, I think it's a really good way of going.
Okay. And that's something obviously MOOCs can't really.
MOOCs can't do it. I mean, to tell you the truth, I actually wrote an article earlier this year on why MOOCs will die, but that's another story.
Okay.
All right, back to our audience. Does anyone here watch Game of Thrones? Yes. Does anyone here access Netflix illegally to watch Game of Thrones? No one's putting up their hands. Well, you'll be glad to know that Netflix is coming to Australia as of March 2015, and Foxtel have known about this for a while, so they've been dropping their prices in an attempt to get members. So it's a great time to sign up for Foxtel if you're wondering. But Andrew, I want to ask you about incumbency, because this seems to be a big topic around disruptive innovation. The incumbents have their product streams, their revenues, their customer bases, their existing businesses become liabilities because they haven't moved fast enough to where the market is. Now, you're in a firm that is a disruptor, but I want you to put the hat on of your competitors. How can an established company respond to innovation? Because there'll be people here working in industries tonight who are in established companies who are being potentially threatened by startups, for example.
Sure. Yeah, look, very difficult question to answer because most of them respond pretty poorly because they have margin aspirations and incentive structures, which mean driving this sort of change is very difficult. And the legal industry is a classic example. There's a saying in the legal industry, very hard to tell a multimillionaire a couple of years out from retirement that his business model's flawed and they should change. I think ultimately in big organisations there's really only been two models that have worked, to my knowledge. One is acquiring the disruptor, and sometimes they acquire it and bury it, but others they acquire it and successfully nurture it. Andy Grove, who's profiled a lot in Clayton Christensen's work, was the CEO of Intel, and I think the title of his biography speaks volumes. It says it's called "Only the Paranoid Survive." And so he used Grove's work. He used Clayton Christensen's work to bring the Celeron processes, so they're low-cost processes, to market. Look, I think the second example where you see is setting up a standalone business unit where they can innovate and fail and develop a different model to disrupt. And so you think about the sort of the skunk works of this world, and quite a lot of companies now do have those little pilot programs going on. Unfortunately, quite a lot of them end up getting buried because they don't get enough rope to succeed. But that seems to be the only models that I've seen.
Okay. Now, just to note to our audience that we will be opening up the floor to questions very soon. So if you have a couple of questions for our panellists, then we'll have some mics going around in just a minute or two. But Annette, on that point of how incumbents respond and this idea of bureaucracy and process, and you have a sales structure or a commission structure on making sure that you get revenue from your existing business, is it possible for large companies to respond to this at all, or is it only the purvey of small startups and lean startups, for example, that can do this?
Totally, absolutely believe in that, and I love big companies. I love corporates because these guys, they create the world, they change the world, they have everything in order to do that. So what I'm focused very much on, I'm absolutely behind this, is the so-called lean startup method, and me being creative, I've kind of mingled it up with creative thinking structures, and what I very much believe in is lean thinking. It's just a different way of thinking. I really do believe that change is the only norm, and this will be very, very much so in the near future. We think we're innovative at the moment. We are only at the start of a very big innovation tsunami, I can promise you that. So change will be just something that we have to embrace consistently. So, clinging to old traditions, to old ways of doing business, it's not going to work. We need to start to look differently at things and have an idea. Instead of making it pretty nice, build a rough prototype and ask the user what the user thinks. And based on that real life information that you can collect, you have actually something to build on, and you have actually something you can go crazy creative on and create something beautiful, because you want to awe your customer, your client. You want to make them happy in life, and you want to advance their life. That's what we all should be able to do.
But if you can't ask your customer what they want, where do you get these ideas from?
You don't necessarily get the ideas from the customer, but you understand what the customer thinks and what drives him or her. However, a lot of times you get really good ideas from them. Right. That's true. And then on top of that, you create, right? And then you obviously need to build a creative team. So I think every bigger company needs what I call a CIO, a Chief Innovation Officer, and a CCO, a Chief Creative Officer. And those will be common professions in the future. I really believe that. design thinkers.
You know, I take a slightly different approach where I listen very deeply to our customers. I mean, I've got a philosophy that businesses or successful businesses do three things, and if you lose any one of those three things, it's like a three-legged stool that won't stand up anymore. One is they solve a problem that someone's willing to pay for. So there's a lot of innovation going on, and if you look at the App Store, there's huge amounts of apps out there. Someone's spent a lot of money developing something that is either free or doesn't solve a problem, so you never download it, and that's just the App Store. Secondly, is they can capture that value. So, you know, for a long time, YouTube, you know, created value for me because I liked watching a cat on a skateboard, but they didn't have a model by which they could capture that value. And the third is that you can scale that value. So you think of a consulting industry, for example. Traditionally, it's been, you know, they create value for someone, they can capture it billing an hourly rate, but all the knowledge is trapped in someone's head, so they can't scale it very successfully. And so if a business model fits those three criteria, you've probably got something, but the key one is solving the problem.
And Professor Hedberg, just to finish off, we've talked about disruptive innovation as a very positive thing, but some stats I've got here, in the United States, from 2000 to 2008, there were 5.8 million manufacturing jobs lost in 8 years. 20% were due to outsourcing, and 80% were due to technology and advances in technology. So when we talk about disruptive innovation being a good thing, do we take into account the human cost of what's going on, where manufacturers or lawyers or journalists or whoever it might be are losing their jobs at quite a rapid rate?
In many cases, there is a drop-off, but at the same time, when people actually choose to go one route because the technology and the affordances it offers enables you to do things that you couldn't do before, then people are sort of basically driving that decision. And if you can't produce a product that people want, then you really are going to run into trouble, and you're going to be one of the group that are less advantaged by the whole process. But I think it's really interesting. I mean, there's over the last few years, you can look at the number of companies that are no longer offering their product. It's been replaced by something else, or we do things differently, or the network enables us to link to people in different and new ways. I think all of those things are an advantage for someone and a disadvantage for someone else.
Okay, we'll open the floor now to questions.
I think you've got an interesting challenge there, because if you actually look at some decisions of government in the last few days, or lack of decisions, they've disrupted a whole lot of things, and it's all by government regulation. And even the current implementation of Uber has got the regulation, as Andrew's already mentioned, hanging over it. How do we do it well? And the entrenched operators have obviously got the strength in the sense that they're up and running. I guess really I think it's a question of how much you can offer services that comply with any regulations or need something changed in those regulations to actually provide an enhanced service to the recipients. And I think in the case of Uber, the fact that you rate the driver and the driver rates you, I think is an interesting one, because as I noted, that the number of people that put their hands up saying they had a wonderful ride with the taxi driver was very few. And I think that those little things will niggle away on an innovation, so that the one that's coming through will eventually take over. But if you go back to the example I used with 35mm cameras, Polaroids, and digital cameras, I recalled the Polaroid camera because I think that was interesting, because people were very enthusiastic about it, but it didn't offer enough as a change from the traditional one where you'd send it off to the lab and wait a week and get the photos back, and they're all black anyway. Those changes, when it came to digital photography, wiped out a lot of the negatives. And I think the same is true about any up-and-coming new idea.
I would like to take the government into exile, tropical island. And then I would imagine that we would co-create what I called red routes. And red routes are the bus lines in London. There's no stoplight. Nobody is allowed to park on that route. It's like a barrier-free zone for buses and public transport. And that kind of framework I would like to create for entrepreneurs and for innovative people. It's a framework, and the content needs to come from these people, needs to come from us. That's what I would like to do.
Andrew, have you faced any challenges in your business with regulation, especially around?
Yeah, as a non-lawyer entering the legal industry, it was a bit to navigate there, and I was running blind. So yeah, certainly, I mean, I think quite simply that the government's primary role is to keep people safe and deliver some services, of course. But I mean, I think that they should just constantly be evaluating new innovations and saying, well, what mechanisms can we do to keep people safe? If it looks like people are safe, then just get out of the way. And Uber's an interesting example. Of course, the taxi lobby's coming out and saying, who are these people driving these cars? How do we know they're not thieves and rapists, etc. You know, the interesting thing about you get into a taxi cab and you pay cash for that ride and you get out, unless you take down the guy's name or badge number, you've got no idea who that person is. And anyone who's ever lost something in the back of a cab knows how hard it is to recover. You do that with Uber, you get a receipt that has the person's name,
Exactly.
photo, Uber ID, route taken, time picked up, all the details
And
you
an email.
need, and an email. And so the transparency of that is a lot higher than, you know, traditional taxis. Interesting, Uber has been disrupted. So the reason why you can get, I think they call it UberX now, is because Uber said, so there was I can't remember the name of the company, but a company in San Francisco that said, why do we need black cars? Why can just anyone in a car? And of course there's regulations that said, look, you have to have some sort of license to be able to pick up and put down passengers. And they said, oh, no, okay, so we won't charge a fee, you just pay a donation. And if you go to San Francisco, you might see these cars with big moustaches on them. Very strange, but that's what signifies that they're part of this network. And so Uber then entered this space by having UberX. I think I'd be very worried if I was the CEO of the Taxi Industry Association. But ultimately, you know, there's still a lot of brand loyalty. There's still the ability to be able to see a cab and jump into it. The problem is that their technology is, you know, 10 years out of date, and anyone who's used one of the taxi apps, it's just hard to do. So all they need to do is replicate the Uber, something like the Uber app, and they're a long way there in terms of having greater liquidity in the market to be able to deliver their services equally efficiently.
But it is an unfair playing field, isn't it? That taxis are regulated, they have to provide fares all the time, they have to provide a certain level of service and safety checks and cameras, whereas Uber can just get a free ride.
Certainly, but equally there's a lot of inefficiency in that regulation. Now, that's not the taxi driver's fault, of course, but you know, paying $800,000 for a license plate to drive a taxi is a market skewing of the market based upon regulation.
And I think taxi usage in San Francisco has dropped by 60% over the past 12 months. It's a stat I read recently, so definitely an impact there.
I think I'd go back to the issue of if some organisation is not doing what their client base want, then eventually they'll lose that client base. So if people are not providing the services, not providing the functionality, and if the technology and the context in which they're operating changes so that it becomes more advantageous to do something else, then that something else will end up happening. It's not a great response, but the other thing that I see, and it's not necessarily disruptive, although it does create disruption, I'm working on a project at the moment to look at developing the science and maths skills of pre-service teachers, so that a teacher can go into either a primary classroom or a secondary classroom and not talk about science as its history, and that there's no process and there's nothing that it offers independently. I mean, science is really important, and the fact that we've managed to turn off a lot of people and put a lot of people into Parliament that don't actually understand any of it and say silly things, I think is criminal. So I'm just hoping that the technology, the people, the way in which the technology can get around the way things are done in existing contexts, I think that offers some hope, and I'm hoping it will happen. On your first premise, I'm not quite sure that I would agree with you. It depends upon how that performance is measured. And in certain types of tests, I mean, the sort of things that we have in the NAPLAN test and things like that, essentially are a very limited band of skills. And performance on that is not performance on life. So I think that we've got to look very carefully how we assess the skills. Secondly, I think that already in those classrooms that have actually understood what they've got with the new technology tools, they are actually working around the system and are actually working out ways of working with their students, providing them with authentic experiences in the real world, in the playground, collecting with data and using scientific processes. And so I see that there's light there and it will work. But I also note in the conversation just a few days back, there was an argument that we should all be trying the Japanese approach to education, mainly because they thought it worked better. And this was a bunch of English educators that had gone off to Japan and thought that increasing the class size and getting everybody to work through these formal exercises was a much better way than doing these exploratory things in the classroom. So I think the jury's out. Everything will work, provided the students are interested and engaged.
I mean, could I just say to that, I think that there's two things at play here. One, there's some truly exciting opportunities now as a result of disruptive innovation, or maybe it's not just disruptive, maybe just innovation. But if you look at something like the Khan Institute, which is kind of like a MOOC, but it's a little brother to a MOOC primarily focused on high school and primary school education. And so what this now means is that kids can go online and essentially learn their coursework before going to school the next day. And then when they get to the classroom, the teacher can give them the intensive care that you'd need to do your homework. So they're actually doing this inversion now where the teacher sets the classroom work for when you go home and then you do the homework in the classroom. And so there's a lot of technologies or innovations coming out like that, which are going to, I suppose, democratise education and take it out of the classroom, which I think is a good thing. I think one of the problems that Australia has as an incumbent nation, because we're on the verge of being disrupted by a whole bunch of countries, is that we've had a focus on rote learning and monoline skill sets for most of our educational life. Certainly when I went to school and university, that was the case. Whereas the skill sets you need today are no longer monoline and no longer based on rote learning. So anything we need to know, we can Google. So having it in your head is of negligible value. You just need to know that there is some methodology there and go grab it. And innovation is all around lateral skill sets. So in fact, the Singaporean government's come out against the tiger mums because they've said, hey, look, just rote learning mathematics is not enough. We need to be able to, the next generation of Singaporeans need to know how to innovate, because we can't just rely on replicating business models from elsewhere less expensively anymore. And I think that's going to have to be a profound change in the education system over the next couple of decades.
Actually managed an organisation that was producing anything apart from students. But I'm very good at doing that, although the government keeps interfering in the process by telling me how I should be doing it. I think that's interesting. But I think you can do it. I mean, I think that if you look at the companies like, well, take Apple. If you go back 20 years, they were in deep trouble. Innovation, they were actually being managed by people that didn't actually understand the technology, didn't understand the market, and really didn't understand what innovative products might be. They also didn't have the focus that I think Steve Jobs put, which is it's got to look good and people have got to want it, for not only for just that it looks good, but it also does the things you want it to do. That company did manage to do things. Companies like Kodak, companies like IBM, never really regained their small device. They eventually just sold it off so that the Chinese could do it cheaper, and they did more of it. So I think that the interesting challenge at the moment, I mean, that we were faced with in the last week, the ABC has been told that it's got to find an extra 250 million. The interesting thing is that the managing director of the ABC has actually been working towards a slightly different strategy for what a communications and broadcaster should be in the 21st century. So a lot of the preparation that's gone on before this announcement has actually positioned them so that I think the government might be surprised that in fact they're in a better position to face the competition that comes from the commercial broadcasters. So I don't know. I mean, you can never tell how it all works out, but I think that there are some good examples of firms that have been a little bit aware and started looking at the options that they've got to put into their product mix.
Annette?
I think next to ideation, trial, measure it, improvements, getting the stakeholders aligned, we talked about it before. I really believe, and thank you for naming Apple, why Steve Jobs was so successful, because he was driven. He was really aligned with what was driving him. And I think most of us, we don't really do what really drives us. If you look at these people, Bill Gates, Richard Branson, Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, they're very driven. And they don't need to sleep, they don't need to eat, they want to do what drives them. And I think if you can help people to discover that, what drives them, and help them to find that within their career, I think we would be much more disruptive, right? And then we have ideas, we trial them, we ask the users, we have really good valid information, we're not tapping in the dark, we ideate on top of it, we rotate, it's like a helix up to the top, and when we launch that new idea, we actually know quite well that it's going to succeed. I don't know, I find it quite a good formula.
And Andrew, last word for you.
Very tough question, and I think very few organisations have done it successfully. I think there's two elements to it. One is you've got to have a higher tolerance for failure rate to make the transition. The second is that the companies that I can think of that have done it have kind of burnt the ships. I think of Kimberly-Clark, which was a paper mill back in the 70s, was being disrupted by low-cost paper mills offshore. They saw their margins declining. The new CEO, who was a quietly spoken ex-general counsel, so a very odd choice, the general counsel, said, look, our future is in consumer products, and actually sold the paper mills. And you can imagine the response from the employees and stakeholders when the paper mill company sold the paper mills and said, we can't go back. The only way forward is into consumer products. And of course, Kimberly-Clark went on to be one of the most successful companies in North America over the next 20 years, and owns brands like Huggies and obviously the Kimberly-Clark line of products it is today.
Can you please put your hands together for them for the great discussion?
Folks, that's it. That's the end of the formalities. The evening will continue as long as you choose it to. So thank you once again, everybody, for coming. I hope it's been useful, and let's enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you very much.